Welcome, everybody. It does work. It's an unusual audience, and I'm not used to looking at an audience that looks this spread out. But we got COVID to thank for that. I'm the president of the board of the museum, and I welcome everybody who is here for being here today. We're going to have a short business meeting ahead of the program, and we're going to get started right now. So if everyone would please stand for the Pledge to Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Do we have any city officials here? I didn't see any come in, or county officials? Evidently not. I would ask that all of our board members who are present please stand so that the others can know who the board members are around here. All right, thank you very much. Our business meeting starts now, and you have the minutes of the last year's meeting on the chairs. We need an approval of the minutes from the 112th annual meeting last year. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? So, okay. Stand and announce your name. Okay. All right. Is there a second? Okay. Please stand, one of you, and say your name. All right. We have a motion and a second. All those approving say aye. Any not approving? The opposite sign. Aye. Okay, no opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. Okay, at this point I'm going to introduce Larry Hoffman, chair of our nominating committee. Larry?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. Always a pleasure. Well, if it seems like more than a year since our last annual meeting, there's a good reason for that. Thanks to a little bug that Bill just identified by name. It's good to see everybody again. We have voting for the members of the Board of Trustees of the Allen County Historical Society is reserved for members of the organization. If you are not currently a museum member, we invite you to become one. There's information about membership at the front desk, and if you say anything like that in front of Donna Collins, she won't let you out of here till you are signed up. If you are not currently a member, however, please abstain from voting. We have trustees that need to be elected or re-elected to the board. Trustees of the Board of the Allen County Historical Society serve a 3-year term, and the nominating committee would like to submit the following slate of candidates for the coming year. Mr. Michael Baker, Mr. Dick Bear, Mr. Larry Huffman, Mr. Jack Somerville, and Mr. Neil Wingent. Do I have a motion to approve this slate as presented? Come on, somebody will. Neil Wingent has approved the motion, and seconded the motion is Jack Somerville. Sorry. All in favor of accepting this slate as moved and seconded, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much. Mr. President. Thank
you. All right, thank you. Right now, as I think most of you certainly would understand, it was a very unusual year for our museum. And I think that we did a wonderful job of adapting to the situation as it was, but it was quite different. And I want to mention especially that a month ago today, we lost a very good friend and board member, Bob Torbett, who had had a long battle with cancer. And it was exactly 1 month ago today that he passed away. And we miss him a great deal. He was on the board for 26 years, very loyal and helpful board member. Okay. At this time, I would like to introduce Amy Kraft, our Executive Director.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see some people here again. We just had an event about a week and a half ago, and we were able to have people in the museum. So it's really nice to see people for other things other than just coming to visit the exhibitions, which we love and we welcome. I don't have a lot of words to say, actually. We gave an overview, some highlights for 2020. But one of the things I did want to do is, you know, the year was a tough year, but ultimately I think we have managed to get through it. Of course, we know it's not done, but I really wanted to take the minute and really thank our staff, because they really went above and beyond in adapting and reopening. When we did last June, there were a lot of things we had to put in place, and it was because of the staff that we were able really to do that. They sat down with, of course, support from the board to really kind of figure out how can we do this, how can we make sure that people are safe. And one of the things that, of course, ended up being part of that was cleaning protocols. That became a thing that they had to do regularly. So I just wanted to make sure that I recognized our staff members, and I'm going to read their names. Charles Bates, and if you're present, please stand. Brittany Venturella, Donna Collins, Sarah Risch, Anna Selfridge, Lisa Weaver, Pat Dayhall, Joanne Parks, Valerie Plaskett, Marion Richardson, Marianne Valentine, Richard Swallow, and Janet Harshman. In addition to the staff members, I would also like to extend a thank you to volunteers. If you are a volunteer at the museum, would you also please stand, like our docents and those volunteers? Because many of them would step up to the plate and they would also actually help the staff. So I just wanted to make sure that we took time to recognize some of them. And finally, the other thing I wanted to make sure that I was able to do is to acknowledge our sponsors for the exhibition that you guys are able to see in this space, which actually is the Ohio Arts Council, Nutrien, and Dominion Foundation. All three of them together gave us financial support so we could present this exhibition, which is actually developed from a collection of works that were out of 2,000 negatives, actually, from the museum's collection. They have never been seen and never been on exhibit before. So it's a really exciting opportunity, and I would just really like to make sure that publicly we were able to thank our sponsors for that. I thank all of you for coming out today, and I would like to turn it over to Dick Bear.
Well, it's a good feeling to start in what would be kind of a new beginning with the events of the last year, and I think it's notable that we are ready again to start your series of lectures. And it's one of the things that we've always looked forward to. We get qualified people to come in and enjoy this part of this thing, and we learn so much from the exposure we get from the series of lectures. But today I'm pleased to have been asked to introduce our special guest. And this special guest has been written up, and you've probably read quite a bit about him. And since we're both from Bluffton, well, he gives me a little bit of freedom here. So at any rate, I'd like to say that he's published many things. He's been an editor of magazines, of newspapers. He's done a lot of writing, and he's a specialist in historic photography, going back, and with all of these things, he's quite good. But I would also like to make a comment or two about the fact that he was born and raised in downtown Bluffton. His home was right across the street from the Catholic Church, and so he and his brother and sister were raised right in the community. And in the community, that was a part of his life, growing up right downtown. And when there's activities in the community, what would happen is that he or his brother would be involved and be around. So as things and events and activities started, why, they became observers. And you could see this historic thing starting with him way back then. And so whenever there was some kind of thing happening anywhere, a fire or an accident or anything in the area, you'd look up and there was our speaker, and he would be right there. Now, we always said, well, he's an observer, or that he's a part of it, or he's fanning the fire. So at any rate, his studying from there on became historic, and he has books, and you'll want to read some of his things here that he has. And we are fascinated by his name. It's, again, in Bluffton, his name wouldn't be normally like Lugabill or Bodicher or Gratz or Benro or Amstutz or something like that. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Fred Steiner. Fred.
Thank you, Dick. Every small town needs a Dick Bear. In Bluffton, we tend to focus too much on when the streetlight bulb burns out. But Dick wears binoculars, and he's looking downstream to see what's coming downstream, just to keep us aware of that. An example is, one evening he stood up in front of the Bluffton Town Council and told them that they needed to put sidewalks, curbs, streetlights, and banners all the way from Main Street out to I-75. Well, that's a half mile. I thought he had lost his mind. Then I drove to the Dayton Airport, got off on the National Road at Vandalia, and what do you suppose I saw? Street lights, banners, sidewalks, and lights inviting me to Vandalia, and the business district was 1/2 mile away. I like Vandalia. I don't know anybody there, but it's an inviting community, and that's what he was trying to tell us too. I do have a book available for sale after this presentation. It's called Bluffton Anthology. A creek runs through it. It includes dozens of essays about Bluffton. And full disclosure, Dick is one of the writers of one of the essays. And if you read the book, you'll find that he tells how to prune a fruit tree using a stray farm cat. I'm not going to tell how he does it, but it works. So, there. Well, we're here to talk about railroads in Bluffton. We think today that we're living in an era with many, many modern conveniences. And I would say that in Bluffton, from 1880 to 1910, there were more modern conveniences that came into play than at any other time, even compared with today. For example, in Bluffton, the water system was put into place so you could flush a toilet. The power plant was built so you could turn on a light. Rural free mail delivery was started in the country. Bluffton University was started as Central Mennonite College. The school system built its first serious school of a brick of 3.5 stories. Bluffton built its town hall, which still stands today. And all of this was done without income tax. And 3 passenger railroads came to Bluffton during this period. So it was a period that experienced tremendous new modern experiences. Now let's look at Bluffton today. Go ahead. There's a map of Bluffton, and you can see that Interstate 75 goes around it. It's in 2 counties. It's in Allen County and Hardin County, or Hancock County. Now you'll see those 3 railroads. We'll call the Lake Erie and Western, what is also the Nickel Plate or Norfolk Southern, goes to Lima. The Northern Ohio, also known as the Akron, Canton, and Youngstown, no longer in existence, but it goes east and west from Delphus to Akron. And then the interurban, which was the Western Ohio Railway, technically from Findlay to Piqua, with connections at both of those ends. Let's look at Bluffton. Let's look at one more map about Bluffton, and I'd like to explain why Bluffton people are so interesting. You see, we're askew. Montezuma's joke on Bluffton was that a Native American Indian trail, which followed the high road, became Bluffton's main street, thanks to the European settlers. But it's not north and south. It's deep northeast and deep southwest. So the sun doesn't rise in the east nor set in the west in Bluffton. You can't ask us to explain how to get to Lima using north, south, east, and west. It just doesn't work. North Dixie Highway is south of Bluffton. So Bluffton is askew. Well, let's look at Bluffton before the railroads came. Here's something from about 1890, and it's looking north on Bluffton's main street. The photographer is Will Triplett, who was a photographer in Bluffton for a half century. And the trees on the right, I'm told, were elm trees. Let's go to the next photo. This is from the top of the town hall, obviously when it was first constructed in the 1880s, and it shows Bluffton looking south. Again, there are those trees. Many of the buildings that are in that photo are already there. The street is not yet bricked, and we'll see how it progresses in the next photo. This is also Main Street, taken from the corner of Main and Church Cherry Street. Those buildings, some of those still exist. And I was curious to focus in on a couple guys standing there. If you look at the next slide, there's a blow up. I don't know if that guy's a tramp or just some Swiss farmer, but he made the picture with a couple businessmen. And the horses are the only people blurred, and that is because this is a 3 or 4 second exposure. The photographer said, "Okay, everybody, be quiet," but the horses turned to see who was talking. So they're out of focus. Now let's go and look at the camera that many of these photos were taken with. This is Samuel Amstutz. He was a Swiss immigrant who lived in rural Bluffton. He did not take he took just a couple of these photos, but I want to show you this because this is the camera that was used to take most of the photos we're going to see. And so when you see, how did that get on the 3rd floor of the town hall? I have no idea. And it's dragged around from place to place. Now let's look at the Lake Erie and Western. This is what came through town in 1872. It was originally a narrow gauge, and it was transferred to standard gauge. This is coming from Findlay, And the photographer, Will Triplett, I think, was making a statement about Bluffton because you can see a water tower there. He was telling everybody who saw this, Bluffton's a pretty progressive place. We've got running water. We've also got a town hall in the background. There are probably other things in this picture that I don't even see that he was proclaiming about Bluffton. I'm curious to see who was driving this steam locomotive, and in the next photo you'll see that. It's kind of a blow up. You can just see the guy looking out the window. Let's go on to the next photo, and this is Bluffton has many stone quarries. This was along the Lake Erie and Western, and I can only say that this was taken because it was probably an enormous order for limestone. There are three tracks. There's a main track, a passing track, which is in the middle, and then this side track to the quarry. And then if we look at the next photo, we'll see the Bluffton, Lake Erie and Western Passenger Depot. And I'm going to show you some more pictures of this. I like the next photo. There's a little boy sticking his head out the window of the wagon. And then in the next one, you'll see a close-up of the men, and there's a guy standing behind them. He's impatiently waiting on the next train, I think. There's always somebody like that in a picture. I don't know who it was, but there it is. You can see that there was a water tank for the steam locomotives. There was also a siding on the other side of the track. So that was the Lake Erie and Western Depot, and John Keller told me that moved. We'll see now where it lands if you move that again. The Bluffton Sportsmen's Club, we've got at least 2 members of the Sportsmen's Club here, saw that this was moved. It was going to be demolished. Sportsmen's Club moved it to the Buckeye and refurbished it. They didn't restore it exactly, but it's in a great condition. It's used, you can rent it. It's used for wedding parties, reunions, class graduation parties. It's a very nice facility near the Buckeye, where is also a swimming pool and some other facilities. So it's a great location for a wonderful building. And it's to the credit of a lot of guys who took the time to move it. Let's go on. And now here is on the right, there's the Western, Lake Erie and Western timetable from Bluffton to Sandusky. It didn't go all the way, it goes to Frankfort, Indiana. But I just want to show you that we're milepost 73.6 miles from Sandusky, the start of the line at this point. Now, something very, very interesting happens, talking again about modern conveniences. In 1923, and I think this was not the only time this happened, there were excursions from Bluffton to Cedar Point. Cedar Point was a destination. It had a beach, it had Ferris wheels, it had steamboats that you could go out on the lake. And this clipping tells about the 1923 trip. How many people do you suppose took advantage of that on a Thursday in August 1923? 600 people. A 10-car passenger train left Bluffton at 7 in the morning, stopped at Cedar Point. Everybody got out, had a great day. 5 o'clock, it came back to Bluffton. Now, how's that for conveniences? You could never pull that off today. There it is. Okay, let's go on. This is what we think of most of the time when we think of the nickel plate, Lima-built Brookshire steam locomotives going through Bluffton all the time, and that was one of them. Let's go look at the next one. Paul Diller took this photo of Bluffton, and he was crazy when he took this picture because that steam locomotive is zooming down the track from Findlay at about 60 miles an hour, and I'm sure that in a few seconds it was where he was. But it's a beautiful picture. And how interesting that the mile post says 74. So it really is 74 miles from Sandusky. This is the final final steam that ever came through Bluffton, and this was on an excursion in the early 1980s, and that's the passenger station would be on the right. That's the freight house, no longer standing, really coming through at a fast clip. Sadly, that will never happen again because the tracks have been downgraded, and it can't support steam, I'm sorry to say. This is what became, what replaced the steam on the nickel plate. That's the Bluebird passenger train through, that was eventually through Bluffton. And the next photo will show the timetables of the Blue Dart and the Blue Arrow from Cleveland to St. Louis. Went through Findlay, went through Lima. Doesn't show the time it stopped in Bluffton, but it did stop there. And that was one of my first experiences as a first kindergarten or first grader to just see a passenger train. I think that's where it really started because it would come in at 10 o'clock at night. I don't know why my family went down there just to watch the train come in. My brother, older than I, told me that was the first time he ever realized there were people of other color in the world because there were reporters on that train that were not the color that he was. It's just an interesting observation. Let's go on. And here we have today's Norfolk Southern through Bluffton. It's a short local train. Okay, let's now look at 1884. The Northern Ohio comes through Bluffton. And it made several attempts prior to this. Finally made it in 1884. It was a narrow gauge from Delphus, eventually to Akron. It had many names. One of my favorite name is the Cleveland, Delphus, and St. Louis. Isn't that the most marketable name for a railroad? You know, if it would have been the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, maybe they would have taken the word Delphus, and now maybe Delphus would be one of the big four passenger trains today, or rails, but not. Okay, so that's where, and this is the ACNY line. You can see it's east and west, Delphus through Bluffton, all the way over to Akron. Never made it to Akron, or never made it to Canton or Youngstown. Also known as the Northern Ohio. The next photo will show the opening excursion. And if you could look at that closer, you would see, I'm gonna read it. Can I take this off? Maybe? Oh, I better not. Anyway, there are some stops along the way. One of them is called between Pandora and Bluffton. One of them is Basinger, one of them is Steiner, and those were farms. And they were stops where the train would stop. At this point, the Northern Ohio only went to Cary. Okay, let's go on. And now, none of this happened just by chance. Here's a receipt, and I'm not sure. This is interesting. This is my great-grandfather, Rudolph Althaus. Why did he keep this? Why did my grandmother keep it? And why did my mother keep it? I don't know. But I found it. It's a receipt for $25 for a subscription to apply on subscription to the Cleveland, Delphus, and St. Louis Railroad. $25, signed by Andrew Hounstein, the Secretary of the Finance Committee. So there was an organization that was working to get that railroad in Bluffton. It didn't just happen, and I'm certain there was one for the earlier train, but nobody in my family subscribed to that, I guess. So it's just interesting to see what kind of things take place to make things happen. Let's go on. Here's a Northern Ohio train coming from Pandora to Bluffton. And the next one will show an enlargement of one of those steam. These are about 1910, not taken by Will Triplett. They were taken by a farmer who had a camera. All right, let's go on. Here is a photo of the final passenger train on the ACNY, 1951. The Delphus Bullet. It was a mixed freight, mixed passenger. This is the Bluffton station, and it's heading toward Akron.
Where are the children?
One of them's Cy Diller's daughter, because I know that, but I don't know. These would be people now in there pushing 80. Could be, yeah, okay. Okay, let's look at the next one. Here is the depot from the other side. I took this photo. This is the final freight train through Bluffton coming from Pandora, and it was in 1982. Interesting thing is, with this, I have a habit of putting pennies on the track. I have a real nice collection from the nickel plate, and the pennies are just smashed. I put about 5 pennies on this track. The train was going so slow that it embedded them in the rail. And when I went to look for them, there was Abraham Lincoln staring up at me perfectly. So I don't have any pennies from that. Which brings to mind the Western Ohio. My mother told me that you could put a penny on the track in the Western Ohio. It would not smash it, but it would be very hot, too hot to touch. So there's my penny on the track story. Well, let's go on. There's the ACNY Depot today. It is in good condition. It is a business right now. The track's not there, but I'm proud to say that both steam line passenger depots in Bluffton exist. You can see them. In fact, so does the Western Ohio building exist, which we'll see in a moment. Okay, here's the Western Ohio. Now, this map does not show steam lines. It only shows electric lines. So this was a burst in the 1900s. The next map will show the Lima route, and it also shows its connecting routes. One went from Findlay up to Toledo, one went to Cleveland, and then from the south, it went to Dayton. So that's what's known as the Western Ohio, known as the Lima route. Let's take a look at the next one, and that's a blow-up Piqua to Findlay. That's the route, and you can see that there's a siding that went over to Salina and another one went down. The main power source was in Wapak. Now let's take a look at the west. Oh, here's the depot. This is still in existence. This is the Bluffton, Western Ohio Depot. The depot was the building on the right side. On the left side was the Bluffton Post Office. This is on Main Street. The interurban went right down Main Street, and it still exists today. Now let's finally take a look and see what happened. Oh, this, I should add, before you look at this, ask yourselves, how many trolleys went through Bluffton a day? How many do you think? Well, in 1907, there were 14 in the morning, there were 18 in the afternoon, and there were 10 after 6 p.m. Those don't count the freight trains. So there were more than 40 trolleys going through Bluffton every day. You didn't need a timetable. That's one of the things that really surprised me when I started doing this, preparing for this. I had no idea that there were that many. So I've got it by northbound, southbound. Some of them, the Cleveland Limited went through Bluffton 4 times a day. It had its own cars, they were yellow. Some of these are local, some of these went to Dayton, some went to Toledo. So it just kind of depends, but that's it. I do not have a timetable from the end. I don't know how many of these dropped off, and think of that. Okay, next shot. Here's the crew that's building the railroad through Bluffton. This is on Main Street in Bluffton, and this crew was putting in the rails. The mayor of Bluffton insisted that they be embedded in cement. And we'll get to that at the end because it has kind of a surprise ending. Anyway, so that's the work-intensive group. The next photo shows a kind of a rare sight, a steam locomotive on Main Street. This was a Western Ohio project. This locomotive was pushing cars that had the wiring and other things, so that this was before the wiring went up. So that's what the purpose of this was. Okay, this shows about 2 years after the rails came in, finally Main Street was bricked. So these guys are bricking Main Street. They've bricked the inside of the rails. Now they're working on the outside. You can't see it very well, but the building on the left eventually turned into the depot, which isn't there yet. And the Shannon Theater is on the very next building. It's not there yet either, but that's where you're looking at. On the far right, you can hardly see, but there's a sign that says no spitting on the sidewalk, referring to tobacco. So it was an interesting time. Okay, fine. Okay, this is from above. This is from the Bluffton Telephone Company. A parade in Bluffton. Most of those buildings are there now. This was taken in around 1910. I'm showing you this because it's an interesting picture, but it also shows the rail down the middle of the street. So that was always there. 40 trains a day coming through both ways. All right, let's go on. This is Bluffton from the town hall looking south. Again, you can always tell a photo of Main Street in Bluffton. You can tell what year it is. If there's a rail, it's 1906 or later. If there's no rail, it's before 1906. This is when the street was bricked. You can see horses were still pretty predominant. In fact, there's a horse something here on the far end here that you can see. So it must have been a real interesting time in Bluffton. Okay, the next photo shows Bluffton looking the other direction, a colorized postcard. These buildings, the yellow one and the one next to it, the one next to it was built in 1899, and this yellow one was in 1900. So these are new buildings. If this was 1906, so Bluffton still was, and they're all there today. All right, next one. Now we finally get to see a streetcar. I had the privilege in 1979 to interview John Keller. I tape recorded it and transcribed it. And if I would not have done that, there are many things today that I couldn't tell you because I had to go back to that interview. There's no other source that I could find. Let me tell you a little about what he said about the interurban. The things that the electric railroad did was break down the isolation between rural and urban areas. For example, before the days of school buses, children came from Bluffton came to Bluffton from Gratz Crossing on the interurban. And when school was out, they got back on the interurban and went home, out in the country. A grocery salesman from Lima or Findlay would come down on the interurban, would spend a day in Bluffton taking orders for grocery. Then 1 or 2 days later, the food would be delivered. That way it was possible to have fruit and vegetables in the wintertime from Toledo. On the steam railroads, there wasn't as much attention to this type of detailed business as there was on interurbans. I was told that there was a man in Bluffton who was a diabetic who took the interurban to Lima to get his shots. Interurbans made a great difference in the lives of people because most of the right-of-way on the Western Ohio, like many other lines, was donated by farmers. Farmers would give up their land in exchange for a stop being placed at the end of the lane for locals anytime, day or night. Get this, if a local was operating, one could stand at night and light a newspaper and flag down the train and get a ride to town. Wow. Bluffton College's men's basketball teams used the interurban to travel to Findlay, Bowling Green, Toledo. In Findlay, the Western Ohio made connections to the north and had through service operated to Toledo and to the south to Dayton. At that time, that was the longest continuous service of electric railroads in the country without change of cars, 165 miles. Let's go on and look at some more. Oh, let's blow this up and see. There's the car coming through town from Findlay on its way to Lima. All right. Here's an interesting shot taken right from the street. Horses and interurbans competing, and probably a vehicle over on the side. So that's a great shot from the street. The next photo is, I wish I could blow it up bigger. I can't. It was a snapshot, so I have to show you the story, but at least you can read about what was going on here. I can tell you that it was a very attractive young woman smiling at the photographer, getting on the interurban. And here we kind of know who she was and all of that. It's just, it brings it all to life. That was right in front of the station on Main Street in Bluffton. Here's a shot looking south, early in the morning. You can see the wires on the top going right down the street. And the interurban is down here unloading and loading. I wanted to see what it looked like, so I blew it up. Let's look at the next frame. There's the what's going on. And again, look at those wires all over the place. All right, continuing. This is Main Street, south of Bluffton, or in the south part of Bluffton. I think this was taken very soon after they bricked Main Street, because this is what the photographer, Will Triplett, was showing off. Look at those trees. I thought I saw someone way down at the end, so I blew this one up, and you will see that there are two women standing there. I think one of them was his wife, because he lived right at that spot. I think he posed them. You can kind of see, it almost looks like there's another person on the other side. I don't know. But anyway, it's just an interesting thing. You can do that when you have a negative that's 8.5 by 11. You can blow it up on this wall and just see about anything you want. All right, going on. This is a very unusual photo because it's taken in the winter. When you think about what that camera looked like, being drug around, the photographer had quite a time with this, but this was obviously a major snowstorm, and you can even tell it by looking at the interurban coming in town. The next photo shows what I think is the other end of the line. And again, if the photographer's near his house is one of those on the left, and he posed two men walking down the street. So I guess interurbans were snowplows in the days before snowplows, but that, yeah, there you go. Quite a storm. Yeah, and two well-dressed men posed, in my opinion. Let's go on. This is an unusual photograph because it shows some switching going on. There are two photos, and I'm going to read you. I showed these to John Keller. He interpreted this for me, things that we would have never known. This is a bird's eye view of Main Street. It shows a single car at the bottom left. John says it was a Dayton and Troy car. How did he know? I don't know. Dayton and Troy car on the bottom. The top cars may have been headed north. Two of the top cars appeared to be freight trailers. I wouldn't have known that. The trolley pole at the rear of the bottom car indicates the car's direction. Now let's go to the next scene and see, there's the top photo, and then there's the action taking place. They backed that car into that siding on Main Street. So one interurban car can be seen, quote, in the clear, while another in full view is on Main Street. The hole, which was called, or freight siding, enabled cars to pass one another on Main Street. And first of all, I am thankful for the photographer who took the time to do this, to demonstrate what was going on, and also for John Keller to interpret it for me. So that's an action that took place all the time, but we just don't see pictures of it. Okay, let's go on. Here's the hole. We're back at the station. There was a siding, and you can see on the photo on the right that the building juts out. That's as far back as the car would be parked, and these windows and boarded in places were where they unloaded the freight. That car may have been there all night, picked up the next morning, I'm not sure. So that's that's why that building looks like it does, and you'd walk down that alley and never give it a second thought to know that it was once a railroad siding. Okay, let's go on. Again, here's another colorized postcard of Bluffton. The next one will show another view, which you can go ahead and click that. Here it is from Main Street, and as I look at this one, I wanted to see what was way down by the town hall, so I blew this one up, and let's see what there is. Looks like another streetcar coming or going. Look at all that traffic that it had to deal with. Interesting. Let's see, that's number 58. Okay, let's go to the next one. Here again is a later photo looking north, and here's where that siding goes into the by the freight station. And the next photo, which you'll see, blows that up because I wanted to see what it looked like. So that's the switch, however it worked. Yes.
During our repaving the streets, the sidewalks and everything, they found a oil switch right in close to here.
Okay.
In down in underneath all the brick.
Wow.
In the street.
Interesting.
And it was for that switch that went in.
Okay.
In between the.
Okay. That's right in front of the Shannon Theater. Right. This. All right. Let's go to the next one. The Bluffton Public Library is in this spot today, and that was the beginning of what is now the Bluffton Hospital. It was the Bluffton Sanitarium at the time. But again, the streetcar going right down the street. Another colorized postcard. All right, and going on, now we're out in the country, and this is a Sam, I lost his last name all of a sudden. Look at Bill. God. Oh, gee, I can't, sorry. Anyway, doesn't matter. Gratz Crossing. This is where the Phillips Road crosses over the interstate. You're looking at a stop for a farm. On the left, we can't see it, but we can see the posts, the wires for the Lake Erie and Western. And then on the other side of that would be the Dixie Highway. So there's three things going on here. And also on the right, you see an oil derrick, which we're going to get to in a minute. Before we get to that oil derrick, let's blow up this photo and look at the interurban track. Let's see what it does. Look at that. That almost looks like a carnival ride. And look at all those poles. What it took to create that. All right, let's go on. Here is an interurban. This is coming in the other direction, and we can still see that derrick now from the other direction. It's headed toward Bluffton. Let's talk about oil for a minute. As you know, Findlay and Lima were serious oil centers. Here are 3 postcards. I want to tell you about the one on the far right. Just a minute. This is gas well number 13 in Findlay. The capacity was 40 million cubic feet per day in Findlay. The center photo was taken in Orange Township between Bluffton and Ada. It's a colorized. It was on County Road 20 and 25. Far left one that I want to talk about. This was one of 7 wells on the Reverend Christian Bodicher farm on Bentley Road. At that time, oil sold for 80 cents a barrel. Reverend Bodicher was offered $20,000 for oil rights, but refused. That oil well pumped for 15 years. So oil is another story altogether. Let's look at some of those guys that drilled those wells in the next photo. Yes?
The picture on the right with the real bright light from Findlay.
Yeah.
Lima called or sent telegraph or something to Findlay and told them to turn the lights down over there. They couldn't get to sleep in Lima.
Okay. My grandmother lived in Bluffton, told me that when she was a little girl in the 1890s, you could see the lights of Findlay from Bluffton. Think about that. Okay, this is one of 16 oil rings who drilled for oil around Bluffton. My grandfather's the man on the left, and I was told that when he went home at night, he had to undress in the back porch because of his clothing. It was soaked in oil. So he did, that was the back porch was for him to take his oil outfit off, and then he could go into the house. At one time, there were 500 oil wells between Findlay and Lima around Bluffton. When you drive to Arlington from Bluffton on State Route 103, every time you see a brick farmhouse, there was oil on that farm because they could afford a brick farmhouse. My grandfather told me that. His saying was, these guys, we made a lot of people wealthy. All right, let's go on. This is an unusual picture during World War I, and I forgot, I'm going to go back one way just to explain probably the most important part of this discussion. How did the interurban operate? And this is from John Keller, most roads in Ohio operated from a current of overhead wires. The pole under tension on the roof of the car had either a glider or a wheel that either slid or rolled along from a copper wire suspended along from an overhead bracket or span wires. A substation was located every 10 miles along the route. A friend of mine told me that his grandmother worked at the Bluffton glove factory on Main Street, Bluffton. Every time an interurban passed, the building's lights would dim. A motorman on the interurban was like an engineer on a steam locomotive. He had charge of the operation of the equipment. There was a conductor, and if there was more than one car, there was a brakeman or two, not only to assist operation of equipment, but to load and unload freight. These men were equally responsible to see that the train orders were obeyed. In Lima, for example, there were 5 interurban lines with trackage rights over a portion of the city. And a note about the Lima Cleveland Limited. In 1911, the time of the Limited in either direction from Lima to Findlay was 1 hour from the station in the heart of Lima to the station in the heart of Findlay of about 30 miles. This included extensive street running with the hand flagging of steam road crossings when the conductor would get off and he'd walk and hand flag the crossing. So, and the Cleveland Limited went at a clip of 60 miles an hour, 1911. Now back to this photo, World War I. These soldiers were on the West area and the Lake Erie and Western. They got out to take an exercise up and down the street, so someone took a picture of that. Kind of an unusual thing. You can see the track, and you can see there's always kids on bikes following whatever parade is going on. The next photo shows, actually this is this is November 11th, 1918. Again, a party, but you can see the tracks. This time dogs are roaming the street at large. And look at the overhead wires. All right, let's go to the next one. This is Beaver Dam. Very nice picture of the substation and passenger station in Beaver Dam. It's no longer standing, but it was on 696. You can see there's a siding there. A very nice picture. All right, let's go on. And here's an interesting thing. Here's a postcard from my uncle, who was a teenager at the time, writing to his uncle in Toledo. It says, "Dear Unc, you'll see me at the threshold Saturday, April 26th. I'm going to stay until Sunday afternoon." So on a Thursday, I'm basing this on the postmark, on a Thursday morning, he mailed that postcard to Toledo. His uncle got it, and then that's the station in Toledo where he met him on the threshold. Wouldn't that be neat to go visit your uncle like that? All right, let's go on. Well, the interurban went out of business, and the final stop was in 1932. However, that soon became ancient history in Bluffton because the very next year, John Dillinger robbed the bank, and that's the only thing people talked about for 20 years. Now, as a closing thought, I want to leave this with you. The Ohio Department of Transportation is in part of the Ohio's biennial budget. The current ODOT funding is $4.4 billion. The railroad portion of that funding for the state of Ohio for 2 years at the most recent biennial budget was $72 million. This year's budget, it's $60 million. So you can see that the Department of Transportation's director doesn't think much about railroads. The interstate highway project from Beaver Dam to 235, it's a 2-year project. That's a $21 million project. That's 1/3 of the railroad budget in Ohio by the Ohio Department of Transportation. So let's go to the next slide. Just imagine if there was fast electric trains from Toledo to Cincinnati right down the median strip of I-75, 40 a day. You wouldn't even need a timetable. That's what was here 115 years ago, but not today. So here's what I think. I think someday, eons from now, there will be an archaeological dig in Bluffton. And the archaeologists will find a street and they'll excavate it and they'll say, this must have been Main Street in a small village because it's pretty wide, but it doesn't go north and south. So maybe it's even older than the European settlement. Maybe it's, gosh, could it be Native American? It goes northwest and southwest. And then they dig 6 inches deeper, and what do they find? A railroad still embedded in cement. And they'll look at each other and say, what were these people thinking? Thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions for Fred or follow-up to his presentation?
I think one of the reasons the concrete is still there, back when it was put in, it was very, very hard concrete. They came through several times to tear up the interurban and never could break up that concrete, never. The interurban's still there. Eventually, when you see the blacktop go down and Bluffton gets smoothed out, you'll see the tracks sort of starting up through the concrete or the blacktop. Still there. Interesting enough, when they redid the street, Fred knows this, I took a dump truck down along the side, and when they cut along the sides, they cut the brick in whole sections. I had the boys, I actually took a dump truck and filled it up with these little slips and the brick. And had the Boy Scouts, for our sesquicentennial, sell those for a moneymaker for the Boy Scouts. They sold every brick. And then on the end of the brick, it says, not for sale, hated penitentiary in Columbus, Ohio.
So there's still money to be made.
Does anybody have any maps of where the oil was boiling out of the ground? Because there were a lot of these, and they went off into little ditches and whatever, and I'm just gathering that they built these oil pools someplace real close to where it was boiling out, but it was boiling out. There was, I know that they were farmers that went and got oil out of them to oil their hogs and oil their cattle, and so they were hunting these pools.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any maps for those.
I think I have seen maps that had little X's that demonstrated an oil well. Yeah.
There's definitely maps for oil wells in Allen County. My neighbor had one inside his house. Yeah.
I actually would like to know, Fred, if some of those photos, where were you able to locate some of those photos from?
Sorry, what?
Where were you able to locate some of the photos?
Okay, for starters, Dick Bear's a great resource. Some of those were his.
Okay.
A few of them were from the society here, but there were also duplicates, and I've kind of collected them. So I just look for them, find them. I certainly invite you. I have some freebies up here, and also some things for sale. You're welcome to to take what you want.
Fred, there's a question.
Okay, great.
How much did it cost to ride it, and was it incrementally in distance that you have to pay?
Yeah.
at the end if you had to
There, I can't tell you prices. There were some prices listed, but they don't translate to me for today. For example, 25 cents from Bluffton to Lima, but what does that mean in 1907? I don't know. I'm sorry, but
Actually, a sign there, Gratz Crossing.
there was a pay station. Yeah. So it was as convenient as possible. The interurbans tried to keep it cheap for that reason. I could say that $25 subscription that my great-grandfather paid, I know that my grandfather, the oil well driller, in 1902 made $60 a month, and they were able to buy a house with that. So $25 subscription was pretty serious money in 1882. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Jack, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to introduce Beth Hardesty. She's the next mayor of Lima. She has an
I would just like to thank Fred for our presentation today. It was really exciting to have you here today. It was really interesting stuff because I also actually live in Bluffton, so it's interesting to learn some stuff. Because of course I'm from Northeast Ohio, so it's always good for me to gather more information about where I'm living, and I appreciate that. I would also like to thank all of you for coming, and I would also ask that you fill out the evaluations. I believe they were on your chair, and those are really helpful because it helps us gather information, understand what we're doing well, also understand subjects that are of interest that you guys can propose, and it would be helpful for us. And I would just say have a great day, and thank you again for coming.